welcome to another edition of the Federalist Files, where I, your charismatic host, breaks down the Federalist Papers into a consumable format for you, the viewer and listener. First and foremost, I would just like to apologize for not being able to upload this video faster. Last night I had a little bit of a mishap. I was absent of power last night. I had a transformer blow up down the street from me, so I was unable to record, and that is why you are getting it now. First and foremost, I'd like to get to some organizational parts of the show here. What we're going to be doing now for the future, I will be releasing a podcast, God willing, and they will be podcast detailing the Federalist Papers, and they will be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I will maybe release bonus episodes here and there, but they won't be entailing the Federalist Papers. They'll be related to different subjects, such as the Constitution, how it relates to what's going on right now, certain scenarios that come up. For example, the voter situation in Pennsylvania, where the Supreme Court allowed them to go up until Friday counting votes, when in the Constitution it says that it should be uniform on one day for all of the states involved. So the states do have their rights in regulating their own elections, but the federal government does set a uniform standard in terms of the date and the time of when these should take place, these elections. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I will be releasing Federalist Papers, reviews, and analyses. And other days, if I release anything, it'll most likely be a bonus episode or some sort of direct message to the viewer. Stuff that's relative to what's going on right now or currently that are applicable to the Constitution and the Federalist Papers. So we'll get started here. And I also do apologize because, I was planning on recording this earlier before my power even went out in the days beforehand. But I've been getting contacted by so many different people that are looking to get their fire, because we currently, under the regime of New Jersey Governor Murphy, there's a very stringent standard in terms of getting your firearms in this state. So I have been, multiple people have been reaching out to me in regards to this. People that thought it was so easy to get their firearms, and then they realized that it's a very long waiting period, very extensive system. So the last 2 days I've been going with friends and family members to go pick up or go purchase firearms, showing them different places. Right now in New Jersey, just to give it a little background information, there really is not. I've been to 3 different gun shops, and there's nowhere near the variety that there was before the coronavirus pandemic, and now the election coming up. So I've been seeing people that have never even fired a gun or even handled a pistol, purchasing firearms and getting their safety courses at the gun shop. The gun owners or the other gun owners, whether it's other gun owners or it is classes that they are running at the gun shops, or it is the seller of the firearms. They're showing them, how to handle that pistol, how the slide hold works, safeties, things related to that. And it's just very interesting, because that's something that wasn't really even mentioned in the in this election, in the discourse, in the debates. They did not even really confront Second Amendment issues. They really didn't confront First Amendment issues. So if you're somebody like me, or if you're listening to this podcast and you're becoming more and more informed, then you're questioning what it is that these questions that they are asking in these debates, and how is it that they are related to your freedom and your liberty, because it seems like they really aren't. There was not one question throughout the debates I mean, I know there was only two, not only the debates, but then the town halls as well with the two candidates that were really related to constitutional issues, with the exception of maybe packing courts. Other than that, I mean, the answers that were given by certain candidates would allude to the Constitution and cite it and say, the people have the freedom to make their own choice, in terms of whether they're going to, go out here or go out there, wear a mask or not, how they're going to conduct themselves, how they're going to keep their businesses open and keep their livelihood going. But, I'm very disappointed with the political system right now, and just a complete lack of confidence. I have a complete lack of confidence in it because of just the core principles that I know and I've been reading, I've been studying now for a while. They're just absent. It's not something that's, unfortunately, it's not something that's important to the regular viewer or the regular voter. They have been tricked into some sort of semantics game of things that really don't have anything to do with the presidency or the candidate. But I'm going to get going on this paper here. I'm sorry for digressing. Sorry to you viewers, but I'm going to continue. It's going to be Federalist number 3. And this is going to be the same, it's titled, "The Same Subject Continued Concerning Dangers from Foreign Force and Influence." It is also written by John Jay, just like the last paper. It came out November 3rd, 1787. The topics of this are fear of foreign influence and a need for a more solid union. It's very similar to the last paper. It just goes into much more depth about foreign influence and elaborates on what the advantages of approving a federal government system would be. Let's see here. Oh, I lost my page. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, in the very beginning of this paper, John Jay praises the intelligence and the political awareness of the American citizen, the average American citizen. They do not subscribe to erroneous opinions in respect to their interests, as in, he believed they were much more intelligent than other countrymen because they just fought that Revolutionary War and they knew what their individual rights were and they did not want them taken away. He puts a heavy emphasis on safety in this paper, being the utmost reason for the people to approve the proposed Constitution and ratify it. And I got a quote here. He warns of enemies, and I quote, "Foreign arms and influence as from dangers of the like kind arising from domestic causes," end quote. So what he's alluding to here is that there's going to be foreign arms and influence in the United States if there is not a ratified constitution establishing that powerful government, and as well as domestic infighting and factions. So factions, I'm going to put that for later, but I'm going to address the foreign arms and influence because that's mostly what this paper is all about. He addresses foreign influence by stating, and I quote, "The number of wars which have happened or will happen in the world will always be found to be in proportion to the number of weight of the causes, whether real or pretended, which provoke or invite them," end quote. So here really what he's alluding to is that the number of real or pretended or wars that are incited, let's say, wars that are incited, they will increase with less of a government influence, meaning if it's less of a unified government, you're going to have an increase in these foreign wars, whether they're real or pretended. And he gets to why he says the word real or pretended, why he characterizes it that way in the next paper. Because in the next paper, he states that there may be people that are out there for their own, they may be rapacious, they may be out there for their own personal gain. That's a reason that could start these wars. And he believed that without a strong government, you'll have people that are nobles with a lot of influence and money. They'll go and they'll start wars with other states or other confederacies in order to grab land, maybe some of the natural resources on that land. So that was really his reason for that federal government. And you will see in the next paper I will be talking about this. I believe he cites the monarchy, I think in Britain. I'm not 100% sure because I just glanced over that a couple minutes ago. But then he claims after that, and I quote, "The just causes of war for the most part arise either from violation of treaties or from direct violence." End quote. And here he's just characterizing the reasons for war that he considers just, the just cause of war. War is almost as if you cannot, not that you cannot prevent them, but those are much more reasonable in normal wars than wars that are fought for personal gain, personal aggrandizement. And he's right. If you violate a treaty or there's some sort of violence, just like World War One was started with whatever that straw that broke the camel's back. And by alluding to these just causes of war, the violation of treaties, he's saying currently that he cites that the America, I guess he didn't call it the United States at the time because it wasn't considered the United States, but America at this time has treaties with 6 foreign nations. They were both maritime and commercial treaties. So maritime treaties were those related to the waters, the oceans. Pretty much a treaty just saying, hey, listen, your country, Great Britain's not going to sail your boat over here in our waters and start attacking us. A treaty like that. And then obviously commercial treaties, which are just trade treaties, whether there's tariffs on those trades or there's taxation, what have you. And I think he cited Spain, I think, as one of the countries. I don't really remember. It's not really important. But now, the reason he calls for a federal government to achieve these treaties is because it's much more of a uniform rule with having that federal government, because all treaties are considered, and you'll find this later, and I will be citing this later, all treaties are considered that of the federal power, meaning states could not have, under the proposed constitution, states could not have a treaty with a foreign power or even with other states. Because then if that happens, let's say, in the case of one state having a treaty with another state, in terms of, let's say, commercial treaty, then New York was known as a big importer. And let's say New York had a treaty with Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania didn't give that same commercial deal to New Jersey. And the New Jerseyans were angry. They were pissed. They would start a war with New York in order to try to get some of those goods out of anger and jealousy. So that was the reason that the federal government would help instill those treaties to be uniform across the country. And he believed it was more efficient than separate confederacies, because then everybody's going to abide by those same rules. And it also helps with when the militaries, in terms of if it's like a military treaty, a peace treaty, obviously it helps because we'll have one uniformed federal army and navy rather than multiple militias amongst the states, which in later papers, the militia, I want to say the militia is cited pretty early in the papers, and the militia is really cited in Federalist number 29, which is one of the most significant quoted Federalist papers when it comes to Second Amendment rights, a well-regulated militia, as well as individual gun ownership. So he gets into that a little later. I think that one is written by Madison, 29. Madison writes a lot of the much more important, prominent individual rights papers. That was mostly his influence, whereas Hamilton wrote, bigger government, more powerful, robust government, his papers. And Jay really wasn't in there that much because he was sick most of the time. But then he argues here that the best security, and I quote, is a cordial union under an efficient national government which affords them the best security that can be devised against hostilities from abroad. This is just, in this quote, he alludes to the federal government. If you have a unified national defense it's much easier to move those troops from one place to another. It is easier to raise those troops and train them because everything's a uniform rule. Everyone is technically becomes on the same page. This is something that you see when FEMA, when our Federal Emergency Management Agency comes into, let's say, Texas because Texas got hit by a hurricane. FEMA in particular, those federal employees, they may come from Washington, D.C. So when they step into the area of Texas, they're not going to know that land as well as state government Texans will. So a lot of the time, FEMA in general, they appropriate the funds. They'll get the funds ready for these states like Texas, such as Texas, and they will just appropriate those funds for Texans, state government, and they'll be able to allocate all of they'll be able to dispatch all the resources that are needed. So that is one good thing about having a federal government is you have a deeper pocket in terms of calamities or disasters. And I think that's partially what he's alluding to here, is that it helps in terms of your security to have an efficient national government and a unified army that's able to mobilize easily. And he outlines instances when the states waged war on the Indian tribes that ended in, he characterizes it as, and I quote, slaughter of many innocent inhabitants, end quote. And he's saying that he emphasizes states have waged this war, meaning the national government has never done something like this because these states or these confederacies have their own military. They have less to answer to because there aren't any type of federal restrictions or guidelines or uniformity. So they will go onto land that isn't theirs and was inhabited by Indian tribes, and instead of try to, I guess, I don't know exactly brush up on my history of the Indian tribes. They would slaughter a lot of innocent inhabitants just to get them off that land, or they would have a fight. A lot of the time, I believe it was in Texas, the Comanches were always fighting the Texas Rangers all the time. Texas Rangers would fight them. I mean, they had brutal battles. But I'm sure that in a lot of these instances, a lot of innocent, Native Americans were killed just because of all of the action that's going on. And, what Jay's alluding to is this has never been a symptom of the national government. It's only been the state governments, and that's another reason for a unified military where there's standards and provisions. And then he goes on to say that having that federal government will help obviate these states from having any issues with a Spanish or British power, because at that time they had territories in the United States, or in America they had territories that were yet to be inhabited or owned by us. So they were neighboring territories that our American states could have had fights with. And once you start a war with a big power at that time like a Great Britain, then it causes, you need a mobilization of the entire military force to fight them because they were so strong and powerful and they were so large. And then he has a quote here to support exactly what I was just talking about. He says, and I quote, "The pride of states as well as of men naturally disposes them to justify all their actions and opposes their acknowledging, correcting, or repairing their errors and offenses," end quote. So here he's acknowledging that state pride, which is something that is almost foreign to the regular American now, because you could say American pride, yeah, there's a lot of people that have a pride in America, not as much as years ago as people had for their states. These men glorified their states. They had a lot of pride for their states. Nowadays, the only people I know of that actually do take pride in their states, as in they'll have state flags hanging outside their house, is Texas. I can't think of any other state that has that kind of pride. I mean, I haven't been all around the country, but I've been in the South. I've driven up and down the eastern part going to Florida, and that's really as far as I've been. But I've heard, from friends in Texas and people that have traveled there, that there is a very strong state pride that permeates over there in Texas. Now, those men years ago, they had pride in their states because they had that power in their states and they were part of the community there. There was not as many inhabitants as there is now. The population was nowhere near as dense. So a lot of these people really took pride in what they created in these states, whether it was their houses or their farms or what have you, or the crop that was there. They really provided for their communities. Therefore, they held a deep pride and admiration of their state. Whereas you little see that. I mean, me personally, I live in New Jersey, but I'm not prideful of this state. I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud of the rights that are in the Constitution and the amendments and the Bill of Rights, but I'm not particularly proud to be a New Jerseyan. I mean, I read all these different surveys where people say what's the most hated people in America, and always in that top 5 list you see New Jerseyans, so which is just hilarious. But I'm gonna continue here. What he alludes to next is the federal government will avoid the stubborn way of the states. They will be little affected by pride, and I quote, he states, will proceed with moderation and candor to consider and decide on the means most proper to extricate them from the difficulties which threaten them. Extricate, and I end quote. Extricate, he means to free them from these difficulties, and what he's really saying here essentially is that the federal government will deal in moderation. They'll be much more intelligent and shrewd in deciding what to do in these difficulties if they are getting close to war. And then on top of that, just if you see if you told me, hey, you're gonna have to fight a federal army from the United States of America, or hey, you're gonna have to fight the militia from New Jersey, which one are you gonna choose to fight against? So just having that federal government there, a strong federal government and a unified military where it's easy to mobilize your troops, other foreign powers aren't going to try to start problems, and they're not going to try to take land or territory from a unified government. And on top of this, he cites that opposing nations will be much more likely to accept any offerings, explanations, compensation, acknowledgments from one united nation rather than an individual state. If you have trade deals that go on through just one state, these countries are much more, these other opposing nations are much more willing to cut off that state. If you have it throughout the entire country, they're not going to do that because, once again, they're going to have to face a strong united military. And just taking any type of, any answer from the United States government is much different than just taking it from a state government. It doesn't hold as much weight. It's not as important. It's not as powerful of a message, even when, for example, when our president years ago was fighting with North Korea over Twitter, and they were going back and forth at each other, him and Kim Jong-un, or whatever their leader's name is, and he was going back and forth. It's much more, just look at the size of North Korea, the amount of GDP they have, the amount of revenue and resources they have to actually build their military power. Realistically, Kim Jong-un didn't want to admit it, but in that situation, he's scared. He's scared out of his mind what's going on. So having that one powerful federal head in terms of just military power, I'm not talking about, Gestapo tactic power. I'm not talking about FBI investigatory power. I'm talking about a military power. At this time, it was existential to have that, or else you were in trouble. Just alone having to fight the Native American tribes, used a lot of arrows. They would be on horseback. They were highly skillful with the way in which they would fight and their tactics. They're very intelligent. So just alone that, you'd much rather have that federal government than deal with these states. And, federal government holds much more weight in terms of negotiating than states do. And to end here, in summation, this paper is devised with the standard that a federal government is imperative to keep the peace amongst the states, while also uniting them in times of war and unifying them when participating in accords such as treaties with foreign nations. So that really brings it all together, that statement there. And that'll be it there for the Federalist number 3. Probably going to be releasing this Saturday in the middle of the day. I greatly appreciate you tuning in. If you could please like, share, subscribe. I'm also going to leave my email in the description box. If any viewers have any type of questions, concerns, maybe comments, criticisms, things I can do better, if they would like to see, if they have questions, they'd like to see videos about other content that maybe I just can't think up at this time, then feel free to do that as well. Until next time, thank you for tuning in.